Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight is a very important discussion. It is the 26th edition of Viewers Edition. This is where you, the public, actually put forward topics that we discuss, the Square resident panelists, and we have a couple of very important topics that you've been putting forward on our social media feed, and with time allowing, we'll try and discuss as much of them as possible. Up for discussion, we are going to start with the Uganda-Rwanda relations, as seen by the visit from a senior Ugandan official just over the weekend. We are also going to discuss topics that you put forward, amongst others, health insurance schemes, as well as smart meter systems for public transport. My name is Dana Mpisi, and here on the Viewers Edition 26th, we are going to be joined by the resident panelists, and I'll start by introducing Berna Namata on my left. Berna, great to have you on The Square.
Thank you, Dana.
Great. Also joining us is Charles Haba. Charles, great to have you on the show.
So, Dana, how are you?
Good.
Berna, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good.
So yeah, we'll try and put as much information in the topics that our public has put to us. And we're going to kick off with the first topic, the most highly favored topic for today. And this is the Rwanda-Uganda relations. And Charles, Berna, and our viewers, we all know that this has been a recurrent topic on The Square, talking about relations between Uganda and Rwanda, mending political ties that have been strained for the last, over 4 years. And right now, we want to discuss, I want to hear from you, Berna and Charles. Last week, the Commander of Land Forces, of the Uganda People's Defense Force, UPDF, Lieutenant General Muhoozi Kainerugaba was here in Rwanda. He visited over the weekend. He had a one-on-one meeting with our head of state, His Excellency President Paul Kagame. Details of their talks were not really given to the public, but it was a bilateral talk, cordial, as seen with what's been put on social media. And he was here to transmit a message, of course, from His Excellency President of Uganda, Yoweri Museveni. Prior to this, we also had special envoy visit Adonia Ayebare, who was in Kigali, I think, just 2 weeks before that. And my questions to you is, these two visits are seen as latest efforts to mend political ties between Rwanda and Uganda. Like I said earlier on, there have been strained relationships between the two countries for the last 4 years. And my take, I have a lot also to weigh in on this topic, but I'll start with the resident panelists. What do you take, what is your take on this particular visit? And what do you think needs to be done to really mend the ties between Rwanda and Uganda following this visit? Charles, I'll kick off with you.
First of all, I think talk is always good. Whenever you have a problem with anybody, whether it is your brother, your sister, your wife, your colleague, your neighbor, your husband, talk is always good. The moment you're not talking, it's not helping anybody. It's only dividing the drift deeper and further, so talk is always good. And if you listen to the rhetoric of the two leaders, especially President Kagame, he has never written off the fact that he wishes that the relationships would be good. If you listen to the rhetoric as well of President Museveni, he almost echoes the same sentiments. Whether one walks the talk and the other does not walk it is a totally different argument. Whether one's subordinates or the led walk the talk of their leader and the others don't is a totally different argument. So the fact that there is talk is very good. That is number one. Mm-hmm. Number two, without consulting anybody, because true to your word, to your allusion earlier, Diana, that we've discussed this on the show quite a little bit, but without consulting any security, political, or whatever official, I'm almost 100% sure that when the Ugandans decided to send Ambassador Adonia Ayebare here, their first intuition is that let's see if President Kagame will allow to receive him.
Which he did.
President Kagame has never said no to anybody.
Exactly.
Right. When they send Lieutenant General Muhoozi Kainerugaba to Kigali, The intuition in certain circles in Uganda will be, let's see if President Kagame will refuse to receive him. And if you look at it diplomatically, in what capacity would President Kagame want to receive Muhoozi? He's not. It wasn't an official visit. It wasn't a state visit. He's not the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Even if he was, he would be meeting his contemporaries.
Exactly.
Right. But because, and this is where I really need to give all the props to President Kagame. He means well. He's a pacifier. Anyone, send him the LC5 of Kabali and he says that he wants to come and see him, President Kagame will happily receive him and probably host him to a luncheon and give him a cow at his farm. So that's the loud statement that we are getting from Kigali. And if you're even to take it 2 notches earlier, there was a time just before we had the Katuna talks, the Ugandans invited us to Entebbe. And they did not believe that President Kagame would go there. He went there because he meant well and he means peace. And he has said this several times. So on the part of walking the talk and meaning it, there is no doubt. However, this is the fundamental problem, is that the demands of Kigali and the demands of Kampala are very different. Ugandans in unison are talking about the border and border closure and border opening. And that's why whenever you see a meeting, whether it is at the level of heads of state or at the level of envoys, the media will be awash, especially the Ugandan media will be awash with border opening, because that's all that matters to them. On the Rwandan side, that's the least of our problems, probably ranks number 9 out of 8. The fundamental issues being raised, especially around Rwandan businessmen who operate out of Uganda, whose goods and businesses were confiscated, people who are still being tortured, lying in safe houses and what have you. But even equally importantly, so probably just to retract a bit, one of the things that should be top on the list is people who are destabilizing Rwanda who have bases in Uganda. So unfortunately, that element, whereas Rwanda and Rwandans will hold it extremely dear, and that's what will be prominent, it will not appear anywhere in the Ugandan press or in the Ugandan circles.
You're saying we have a sort of difference in priorities regarding expectations for these talks.
Absolutely. Yes.
Border opening is mostly for Ugandans. I think it's also echoed by Rwandans, but I think Rwandans in unison, what we also, from what I've seen you doing in the media, is a call for action to really stop the arbitrary arrest and torture and detention of Rwandans in
But I want,
Kampala.
just before Bana jumps in on this, I want to give credit to the politics and the politicians of Rwanda on one thing, is that because very many of the people who are in the echelon were either brought up or were born or understand how Ugandans think, they know how to pinch where it hurts. Close that tap of the food, and then they will listen to you.
And here,
all these,
I'm thinking
you're talking, because I'd like you to also be a bit more specific.
the border closure.
Yes, the border closure.
The trade that amounted to, almost $250 million.
It doesn't mean that Rwanda didn't lose anything. No, of course we've lost. It doesn't mean that people livelihoods have been hampered. Of course they have been, but Rwandans will be very quick to jump to the next available option and grab it. On the other side, it's not probably the best thing to say, but on a lighter note, there's a reason to which every Ugandan function has food. There's so much importance to eating even when you're satisfied. So all that Kigali needed to do was to touch the element of food. And food is an idiom to address anything that puts a meal on your table, whether it is money or business or whatever, or whatever, yeah. So, and that is why we're being listened to, because we know how to communicate, yeah.
But in answering the question, I wanted to hear more, and I'll come back to you, Charles, after I hear from Bernard, your expectations going forward. I think, you know, if you could couch that a bit better in terms of, you know, people are saying this visit has happened, it is a sign of good things to come. You know, President Museveni is sending his son in his capacity as special, you know, forces advisor to meet President Kagame. What happens next? And I'll come back to you on that. If you could have just your opinion, your informed opinion on what you expect.
You want me to give that now or later?
No, let me just hear from Berna before we come back to you. Yes, Berna, over to you.
I think the optimism is kind of misplaced, in my view.
You're not even cautiously optimistic?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
And there's reason why.
Yes.
I'll share a timeline. Let's remember that we have been at this since 2009. And since 2009, we've had several engagements, high-level engagements, you know, regional leaders involved. So we start with the meeting in Angola, at that meeting in Angola, there was a huge statement that came out. There was a communique. And from Angola, we come to 14th of Feb in 2020. Again, there was a communique. And
with requests from
yes,
the Rwandan side?
No, both sides
Both
actually
sides, yes.
Signed onto that communique.
Yes.
And
with expectations from both sides to meet their
yes, you know, yes, with expectations.
Yes.
And we do have an ad hoc committee that is actually assigned with the relations for two countries to be restored. So for me, until we have heard from the ad hoc committee, it is difficult to see where the optimism comes from. And let me stick to some of the issues that were raised on paper, and you have both countries sign on this piece of paper. One, they committed to verifying the status of nationals of either party detained in both countries, and there was supposed to be a note in 3 weeks. They both agreed on protection and respect of human rights and nationals, either party, absorbing international law, you know, in this whole process. This is what both countries agreed on. The other one was to finalize the extradition treaty. I'm talking about 14th of Feb, 2020, what was signed, yeah? Finalizing the extradition treaty, which would be signed at a quadrilateral summit on 21st of Feb, 2020. The other one was, Rwanda was to write formally to Uganda with specifics related to the alleged activities of destabilization happening in Uganda. Now, we come to 20th Feb, yeah? We come 21st of Feb. Now,
still,
but there was a caveat.
Yes.
There was a caveat on what was signed on 20th Feb, which was subject to fulfillment of the above undertakings. The ad hoc committee recommends a quadruple summit, which we saw to consider normalization of relations, which was supposed to happen 21st of Feb. Now, what happens on 21st Feb? That's when we saw, again, the summit, the heads of state meeting at Gatuna. At that summit, an extradition treaty was signed. And part of what it's supposed to do is to handle cases of justice, including those related to alleged subversive activities practiced by nationals on either territory. The summit also recommended that Uganda should, within 1 month, verify the allegations by Rwanda on its territory. Yeah? And if these allegations are proved, Uganda will take measures to stop it from happening again. This is what was signed. 21st Feb 2020. We come to this action of Uganda taking, you know, dealing with the elements that the alleged subversive would be verified, confirmed by the ad hoc ministerial commission.
Yes.
Yeah? Now, bullet 5 on what was signed on 21st of Feb says, once fulfilled, reported to the heads of state, facilitators will convene within 15 days at a summit at Gatuna Katuna for some reopening and normalization, subsequent normalization of relations. Now,
We're now in 2022.
we are now in 2022.
Yes.
Yeah? As we speak, in just 2022, we have 121 Rwandans that have been deported. This is January. So when people are confident, where is it coming from? That relations are on track. For me, just based on what is publicly available information, I think it will take more than just envoys coming here. Until we see what has been written on paper actually being done, I remain skeptic.
I like that you ran through your explanation on your expectations with, tangible dates and agreements that were signed between two countries to normalize relations. And it is understandable, based on what you said, to be as skeptical as you are. But some of the requests, for instance, the change of guard in some of the military personnel in Uganda, such as, I think you know that Mr. Kandiho was repurposed.
That's how much you don't like.
Was put to South Sudan. I just feel like these are some of the requests that were asked for. We are seeing some of them happening in piecemeal. So I just want to understand some of our requests have not been met the way we want them to be met. And we are talking as Rwandans in Rwanda based on what we requested with this, Rwanda, this agreement between the two countries. That still doesn't seem to show you there's some sort of light at the end of the tunnel?
For me, it remains speculation. I haven't seen any document to that effect that says Rwanda demanded so-and-so be removed. I haven't seen it, so I cannot speak to that allegation. Yeah, I can only speak to things that both countries, the things I described here, both countries have signed.
And are publicly available.
And they are publicly available. It is verifiable. Yes. That's number one. Number two, to the point that there's been talk and talk and talk. I mean, you get tired of these things. Yeah, because let's put perspective to it. What do you tell families that are waiting for their loved ones?
Or who are afraid to visit, to cross borders?
Yes, what do you tell them? They don't know. Every day for them, they are waiting. So I think we have to be conscious that even if some of us may feel a bit of, not affected by what's happening, but we have families that are missing their loved ones. We have families that have, people who are permanently crippled, because they came back and they were tortured. So
from Uganda to Rwanda.
Yes, so we must have perspective to these things. And so you can't just tell them that a visit has resolved issues. And for me, I feel the responsibility remains on the elected officials. Yeah? I mean, you will have envoys come in, but on both sides, people have elected people and given them responsibility to safeguard national security, to protect them. So until we have heard from those two and saying, we can guarantee your security, then for me, I don't know where the optimism comes from. Because again, you have a lot of diplomacy around these things.
For sure.
Nobody is going to outrightly say, this doesn't make sense. Yeah.
Fair enough. Charles? Looking forward and expectations.
First of all, I think I'm not going to be in the space of giving the two recent visits a short shelf life. We've gone through COVID and COVID times. That's not the best example to give, but it's a perfect situation that shows us that if you keep optimism, the future is bright. It would have been very different if President Kagame had not received Ambassador Ayebare, if President Kagame had not received General Mohozi. It would have been a lot different if we were not having these discussions and we say it is a lost cause. We're in a terribly bad relationship and we'll never mend fences again. But because of the thickness of our relationship, all parties are interested in making sure that that normalcy returns. It's the how that is the problem. And I don't agree with Bana quite often, but on one fact I will agree with her, that in this particular round of disagreement, getting rid of intelligence officers or the bosses of the intelligence organizations was not a prerequisite, unlike in 2007, I believe, when we had another, I think the probably most recent round of very serious quarrels, where one of the conditions that was documented is that
to remove.
Yes, because both countries felt that the heads of the intelligence organs were fueling the problem. This time round, it was not. But that said, I think beyond our issues, we need to look at the geopolitical space. President Museveni suffered a bit of a surprise in the last presidential elections, and media and everything, everyone that cares to listen is awash with the son being groomed to take over the presidency. If you look at the recent visits, his visits to Kenya and him coming to Rwanda and his tweets and what have you, you can almost see that it takes a severely visually impaired person to not see that he's warming up. Now,
severely impaired vision.
Yes. If you look at the visit in that lens, it would not be surprising. That it would not be surprising that he would want to make friends with his future next of kin, if I can put it that way, right? If you also look at other elements such as, and here I will move away from General Muhoozi and look at other geopolitical happenings, especially around the massive UPDF deployment in the DRC, where they are using a hammer to kill a fly. You would not be shocked that the UPDF has deployed massively and is bragging aggressively about the ADF and how they've crushed them, and you have to link that with them blaming Rwanda for assisting the ADF in destabilizing them. But that's not enough in as far as our strained relations. If you look at the promises around diverting a road that goes to DRC that was previously being taken through Rwanda, but now they say they are going to take that road through their country and then it ends up there. You have to understand it from a very, and that's the point I'm raising, from a very geographical political position for you to appreciate that you should not look at these visits in isolation. I want to conclude on one thing, Diana, that by virtue of the fact that Muhoozi and Ambassador Ebare have been here in quick succession, it should not be taken lightly. They did not send themselves here, for sure. They were sent by the appointing authority. Bernard did mention something extremely important about the fundamental issues that Rwanda is raising. There is a court case happening, and this is where I want to conclude on. There's a court case happening. It involves former officers of RDF, notably this one that passed on was Captain Sibo, if my memory serves me right. And then there's Major Modasiru Habib, who, documentation, court evidence and everything shows how they left Rwanda, went to Uganda, spent a bit of time there, left Uganda, went to join forces that were fighting us in the DRC. So when such things come to light, you have two options: to swallow humble pie or to vehemently deny. I want to imagine that these recent visits are about swallowing humble pie.
Interesting. Brenna, just before we go to our next topic.
Yeah, just to, my final submission on this issue would be that in politics, there are no permanent friends or enemies. That's the overriding principle.
I think we keep on mentioning that.
Yes,
the only,
the only permanent thing is interests.
Strategic interests.
Yes, strategic interests. So anything is possible, yeah, but I think it would be far-fetched to imagine that this change is going to happen tomorrow. But we must remember, there are no permanent friends, there are no permanent, enemies.
Yeah.
And we don't have to be the best of friends to be neighbors.
Exactly.
Really. Yeah. You keep safe, I keep safe. Just don't interrupt me.
And let the normalization of our people, the citizens, basically between two countries, carry on. No, but thank you very much for your submissions, Brenna. What I get from you is that and also what our viewers are looking at is the concept of the clear terms of expectations that have been documented between two countries before they're yet to be met. You're not even cautiously optimistic. You will remain skeptical until you see tangible sort of results. And Charles, I really like your comment about saying you'd not like to give these two consecutive visits by Ambassador Ayebare and General Kainerugaba, give them a short shelf life. This is the beginning of possibly something that will lead to you remain optimistic. Because we really need to mend these relations. I think that saying is when the elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers, so to speak. Yeah. I just want to tell our viewers that you can keep the comments coming using #TheSquareRW. We're seeing a couple of tweets coming in, and please keep them going, and we'll read them during the show. The next part of the conversation is a very interesting one, and it's based on events that happened last week, if I'm not mistaken. And this is to do with health insurance schemes. Brenna, I know you have quite strong opinions on this particular topic. So just last week, the Rwanda Medical Facilities Association, RPMFA, put out a notice suspending services to patients with insurance with the following companies. Respectfully, those were Britam Insurance, Sanlam, as well as Radiant. And this was because of non-payment of these insurance firms, apparently, to the health facilities. And of course, the deadline they gave was 25th January. And what happened was that the government intervened. Many have said this was an aversion of a potential health crisis because over 100,000 people would be left in the lurch if this went through. So the issues between medical the medical facilities with insurance companies, medical service providers accuse insurance companies of non-payment, as they say, or delaying to pay or rejecting invoices. And then insurance companies, on the other hand, are accusing these medical facilities of unethical practices, of fraud, of not really reporting the actual finances or raising the premiums unnecessarily. Now, the conversation that we need to have here is between you and Brenna, you and Charles, is what needs to be done so there's not a recurrent situation of this. It's been hopefully averted. People will still be able to, go to the hospital and be treated with the insurance from these companies. But something like this being put out, you think if these are listed companies, what does that say? In terms of confidence. Brenna, what are your thoughts on how this can be averted in the future and what needs to be done between medical facilities and insurance companies?
I think what we saw, the statement I think came out on Sunday.
Actually, I think there was an assembly on Friday.
Yes.
And then, things rolled out and the statement came out a few days after.
First of all, I think the people in charge of regulation need a thorough beating.
Mm-hmm. Why?
Yes, because it is health. So we can't avoid a crisis in the health sector. Because if someone cannot get the medical care they need, you never know what happens. Yeah. If somebody dies because they're having to make many calls to make sure that their insurance is going to pick up the bill. That is a life gone. So there are some sectors where you can't afford a crisis, okay? And
the health sectors is a priority area.
Yes, yes. Sure. And so for me, what I see from the different sides, because you have on one hand insurance companies saying we are trying to protect our clients from overbilling. As such, we are auditing whatever we receive from the healthcare facilities. The healthcare facilities are saying this process is taking too long. We need you to pay up, or your clients, we cannot help your clients. And
so the consumer is bearing the brunt of all this.
Precisely. So, and that's why you need regulation, effective regulation of medical insurance.
But it's there.
Effective, that's my keyword. Effective regulation of health insurance, effective. The regulation is there, but it has to be effective. And it's kind of peculiar because it's unlike other sectors where you'll say it's market forces, demand and supply. You can do that with health insurance, One, there's an imbalance of power, The healthcare provider has more power than you, the client, first of all, And on the other hand, the insurance companies even also have more power because of the information they have, So as a consumer, you need protection. And this is where you really need effective, regulation of health insurance. So for me, part of the solution, first of all, lies in maybe considering a specific agency that can drive effective regulation of the health insurance, because if you leave it to market forces, it just can't work because of the dynamics. We've seen, for instance, it's difficult if you go to a private health facility and the doctor is requesting for certain tests, which you may think are questionable. As a patient, what right do you have? But why should you be punished for what the doctor is demanding? So again, until you have effective regulation, where you have specialists, and they can be typical bureaucrats, really, people with power who understand the dynamics of these imperfect market, health insurance, then it will be difficult, really. The consumer will continue to have problems.
I think, yeah, absolutely. And the fact that this happened shows there's actually a gap in between, the consumer's protection. By the time, the Medical Facilities Association comes up with this in less than 2 days, slaps it onto the insurers and says, this is what's going to happen. If I'm with Sanlam or Radiant and during this period, if it was not averted, what would happen to me, especially if I had a sort of life-threatening condition. So there's definitely a gap between how both bodies work together. So I totally agree with you in looking and reviewing what needs to be done to protect the consumer further moving forward to avert something like this happening again.
And also, in addition to that, we must appreciate the fact that the value of health insurance really lies in the unpredictable health spending. Yeah. So how you're able to balance on one hand the risks, the risks and the expenditure. It's quite complex.
Yeah, it's very complex.
So you really need, again, an agency that fully understands what they're doing. If you just leave it to the Ministry of Health and it's overwhelmed.
Yeah. Charles?
First of all, I blame the English. They call somebody who is sick a patient. By definition, when you go to the hospital to seek medical attention, you're supposed to be patient. And that alone, even though it may sound ridiculous, but I think that alone defeats the essence of the patient's charter. If you look at the patient's charter, one for one is we are supposed to be saying no to some of the things that happen to us. I have an appointment. I mean, when you go to the clinic, I have an appointment at 2 p.m. I see the doctor at 4 p.m. My shoulder is hurting me. I'm subjected to an MRI scan, even though I've not been explained to what the MRI is going to do. I have not been told the drugs that are being administered to me, and so on and so forth. So, because we think that medical practitioners from the entire value chain, the gatekeeper to the receptionist, the nurse, even when you're just going for a mandatory COVID test, that they're doing us a favor. Because we think that they're doing us a favor, we don't complain. And to Bana's point on consumer protection, I think there's a huge gap there. But the second thing is around fraud. And because it's a business, and whether you look at it with the lens of somebody who has borrowed billions of money at an expensive interest rate to invest in a hospital, or whether you look at it with the lens of a multinational company that has come into Rwanda to invest in medical insurance, it's a business at the end of the day. The other guy who has put in billions in a hospital has to make money for themselves and also to pay the bank interests, exorbitant interest rates and what have you. At the same time, the other insurance company is not in the business of just paying bills. They'll collect our premiums, give bank X deposits, bank X gives them remuneration, and when the central bank, who is the regulator, overseer of all these guys, is going to see that the bank is very innovative in terms of collecting deposits, then they will say, okay, fine, you're good at collecting deposits. They will probably not be too keen on seeing the other side of the coin, and that's where regulation comes into it. But I want to dwell so much on fraud and give you live examples.
Fraud from the medical facilities?
From the medical practitioners, yes. Especially the medical facilities.
Yes.
You will find cases of Bana Namata, and I'm going to give this just as an example. On the 20th of January, 2019, is in the records of the hospital as having gone for circumcision and medical insurance paid. It's a hyperbole, but it's very, very emphatic because...
So these discrepancies are actually there?
No, you will go. I have walked into a pharmacy and I have an option to buy my drugs on my medical insurance or pay cash, and sometimes you find there's a difference of 800 francs. There is the medical thing that they use to clean wounds. I think it's called gauze or whatever it is. Yes. I have a friend who's in that space of medical supplies, and they'll tell you the kind of things that are done. If medical claims are being done, they will say a particular clinic that does not even have a service of, I think the generic word is consumables. So whether it is test tubes or gloves or whatever, you will have more consumables depending on the medical service that you offer. So you find somebody is claiming to have rolls and rolls of used gauze, and it is attached to a certain medical insurance company, yet they don't have that service. They say that they have done x-rays of people, yet they don't have an x-ray machine.
So Charles,
Yes.
just for my benefit and the Bureau's benefits, this level of fraud, it's staggering.
It's extremely immense. And that is why the insurance companies woke up in the morning and said, no,
we're going to start auditing.
We're going to start auditing and and making sure that there's value for money. We're not losing money here. Now, whether that is an entirely good reason for the delay in payments or not is a different story. Because with technology these days, I believe there must be a real-time way of when I put in my fingerprint and say I have had a CT scan, it should show in real time that that particular medical establishment has a CT scan. Today, the things that happen are ridiculous. They ask patients to drive to the medical insurance head office to get an approval for a CT scan or an MRI scan just to be sure that that medical establishment is not telling lies. The levels of mistrust are
Quite high.
defeating logic.
I had no idea.
Yes, that's how bad it is.
I
I mean,
think-
it's happened to me
Yes.
2-3 times.
Yeah. But I had no idea, like, you know, these health facilities,
Yes.
this level of unethical practice is that staggering.
Yeah,
But
I have heard, I've not independently verified this,
Yes.
I have heard of medical practitioners who get a percentage of a fee when they recommend that
Service.
a certain facility, whether it's MRI, like I think the most expensive is MRI,
or a CT scan.
yeah, that you go and do this in as long as you have sent that patient to us, you have a cut of X.
Wow.
So
it's,
it's glaring. It's really glaring. And when you speak to some of these guys and you ask yourself, the amount of money, you know, you go to South Africa, you go to India, hospitals have been built because of the amount of money that Rwanda Medical Referral Board has sent across the board. Then if you look at the numbers, you'd ask yourself, why shouldn't medical tourism be a big thing? We should actually be investing that money here. If all that money we're putting into King Faisal can reduce the amount of money the Rwanda Medical Referral Board is spending across, it should be a good thing. But we need to be ethical. Everyone is in business, whether it is the guy who invested in a clinic or in a hospital, or the guy who invested in the medical insurance company. They are all in business, but we should not underlook ethics. Yeah.
Brenda, just very quickly with you.
I think it's not just medical centers that health facilities that have fraud, even insurance actually. And for me, my understanding is actually that we have cartels. You know, cartels that involve insurance, regulators, and healthcare providers. So I think RIB should pick interest and actually try to investigate some of these things to protect consumers. Yes, because again, by nature, if you have effective, again, regulation.
I like that you keep on saying, regulation is there, but you keep on saying effective.
Yes.
Regulation.
Effective regulation spreads the risk, you know, because you have risks on, expenditure and on the other side. So until we have effective regulation, we still have problems. Because what you really want to see is accountability from the different stakeholders. Now, you have one side that is more vocal than the other. From the look of things, the insurance companies think that everybody should be on their side because they are trying to protect, clients. And one of the basic questions I've been asking is, how many times has your insurance company returned your money because you didn't visit a healthcare facility?
I think that's unheard of. It's either put to the next year or...
Yeah, so if we can just have effective regulation, if we can have proper monitoring, we wouldn't have some of these market failures that completely, result into consumers being helpless. Yeah.
And Brenna, your sort of solution to this is, coming up with an agency or a platform that marries, is a sort of intermix between, health facility associations and insurance companies, and put it there to drive forward the consumer protectionism even more than what's being done at the moment.
I just want to say something before you jump to the next.
Go.
I think, I don't know that I live in a real world, but profiteering or excessive profiteering from somebody's medical condition should be a criminal act. I don't understand how you can claim that you sold 25 x-rays when you don't have an x-ray machine. I don't understand how the insurance company can wake up in the morning and say, we're not going to pay your bills, yet you're on your deathbed. So I think, in all due fairness, there were extremes on both sides, probably because they could get away with it. The insurance companies were in deep pain because of the fraudulent acts and malpractices by the medical facilities. The medical facilities were in financial pain because of the inefficiencies and the timelines and
the non-payments.
And the non-payments
Yes.
by the medical insurers. So all of them have their own very valid points. And in the end, they're thinking about themselves individually. And that's what I'm calling excessive profiteering from somebody's medical condition. And I think that's around the point we were raising earlier on about consumer rights, that even in the event that there are discrepancies or whatever, there should be a mechanism, whether it's an insurance fund or however we christen it, that the patients should never suffer.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Moving to the last topic for tonight, and this was put forward to you, our viewers, across all our social media platforms, was the smart meter systems for public transport, specifically taxi motos. And after less than 1 week, taxi motos were told to use mandatory smart meters. It stopped earlier this month. The government suspended this temporarily, just to iron a few issues that rose with this decision to make it mandatory for taxi motors to have the smart meter systems. Some of the key issues raised by these taxi motor operators included skyrocketing insurance premiums, incidentally, what we're talking about right now, the high cost of the motor meters to digitalize the service, that is their purpose, but they're quite expensive, the high penalty fines for non-use of these smart meter systems on motors, amongst other things. So my question to you, Charles and Brenna, last topic for tonight that our viewers put for us on Viewers Edition is, do we need a more consultative process between the regulator and such associations when these decisions are made? Because sometimes it feels like, someone at Rwanda Utilities Regulatory Agency, RURA, just woke up and, slapped something there, and, you ask and they say there was a consultative process, but the consultative process is less than a week and that sort of thing. And this is not the first time we've had taxi motors just protesting and having their way, because their concerns are quite valid. So do we need a more consultative process? What needs to be done so we can prevent these sort of scenarios from popping up again? And I'll kick off with you, Brenna.
I mean, to my earlier point, effective regulation.
Yes,
because you have different stakeholders that are involved. You have the investor who has put money into the software. You have the entrepreneur that owns the motorcycle. You have the
consumer who's riding the motor.
You have the consumer
who's going to pay a difference of 300 francs now. Or,
yes.
That sort of
you
thing.
have the consumer.
Yes.
You have the regulator in there. Then you have the taxman there. So who coordinates that? Yeah, because what you really want to achieve again is how do you spread the cost so that there's no party that feels aggrieved that they are paying more. So unfortunately, I'm not an expert at transport regulation, but I feel that RURA can do more and can do better by one stakeholder consultation. We always talk about it, that don't sit in boardrooms and come up with these policies just because they have worked somewhere in Brazil. Do a lot of consultation to really understand the unique circumstances.
And the context.
Yes, and the context. Because one thing is for sure, the purchasing power is still limited. If you look at the profile of the typical motorcyclist, even them, their purchasing power is really limited. So if you're putting a burden on them and these expenses, then it just becomes impossible, So consult and see if one, for instance, again, government could come in with a subsidy just to drive uptake, and then find a way of navigating who goes with what, the portion, how you allocate that.
I just wanted to read some numbers that I came across, just reading up about this particular issue regarding taxi motor meters, and this is to do with the spike in insurance premiums. And one of the issues raised by the protesters, the taxi motor operators, was the high insurance charges on the annual premiums. This increased from 61,666 francs to 153,280 francs for a motorcycle that was manufactured 5 years ago. Motorcycles that were manufactured 6 to 10 years ago used to pay 166,220. Now pay that, up from 61,666. And those that are above 10 years pay insurance premiums annually of 180,160 francs. These insurance premiums that are just going super high. Brenna, you alluded to a sort of cartel where insurance companies just fix prices and that's it. I think we saw this happening in the beginning of 2018 and that sort of thing. So it's I like your comment on just making sure that there's a more consultative process, understanding the context before we roll out this sort of the efforts are commendable. It's to move to a cashless economy, digitize some of these transport services, but yeah, the contextualization, the consultation, I think needs to be thought more.
And also, if I could briefly comment on that,
yes.
We've again always talked about coordination among government agencies.
Institutional coordination.
Institutional coordination,
Yes.
because if you look at the cost around the costing of the premiums associated with the environment, actually, because if you're taxing based on when it was manufactured, it's actually got to do with protection of our environment,
Absolutely.
But who understands that? For the motorcyclist, all they're looking at is how much they have to pay, So
they're competing priorities, environmental,
yes,
health and safety. This is why there are, premiums on old motors. But at the same time, going back to your point, contextualization and consultation. Charles, before we go to
I think I will take it away from the insurance companies for a bit, because I do not have the statistics, and this is a bit of a disclaimer on my part, but I will not be shocked if, because insurance companies, it works in a very, very simple way. It's about risk, so insure risk. I will not be shocked if the highest number of risks in the insurance space, motor insurance space, are from motorbikes. And then therefore it justifies increasing their premiums. I will again not be shocked if statistics came up and they said that there's quite a number of motorbike riders who actually do not have licenses, and then therefore when they get into an accident, insurance cannot help them as much. I'll at the same time not be shocked, because it's happened to me, we are all drivers on here, that you find motorbike riders doing all sorts of crazy stuff on the road, and then when the police report comes out, the motorbike guy is actually in the deepest of problems or mistakes. So I think from the insurance part, against that background, I'd want to exonerate the insurance companies on increasing the premiums. But that said, I think there's something we need to check about these motor guys. Yes, they are an entire constituency, and I want to politicize this a little bit.
Go ahead.
But why is it that whenever they comment about something, we all wake up and we give it attention? Starting with speed cameras of recent, fast forward after the speed cameras, there was the issue of this whole conversation we're talking about cashless economy, but yes, they are very significant representative of our day-to-day lives because they're the most efficient way of moving around town. But isn't it going to be taken for granted?
Good question.
Yes.
I want us to,
Yeah.
good question, Charles.
Yeah.
Very good question. I want us to just go quickly to our Twitter feed and read some tweets that are coming in before we close tonight. And if we could have them on our screens. The first tweet is from Hakeem, and Hakeem says that, hi, Rwanda Square panelists. I agree that the issue of Uganda and Rwanda has affected either the social, political, and economic lives of both citizens. But I also agree that Rwanda's reaction was not only seeing the nearby benefits, but also the life of Rwandans in years ahead. That's the first tweet we have coming in. We have another tweet from the same person, and he says, it's better to live a few years of misunderstanding, but paving a way for sustainable understanding and cooperation between the two countries. I'm sure both citizens of the two countries will appreciate this later as we pray that the bilateral talks bring up something positive. Thank you very much, Hakeem. Bernard, I can say he's cautiously optimistic. We have another tweet coming in from Grace, who says that I wish anyone using local private insurances like UAP, Radiant, Britam, or Sanlam, except RSSB and MMI, should always have a backup plan by getting mutual insurance. Those companies are not reliable and might abruptly terminate their commitments when bills are high. Okay, Grace, that's a loaded comment. And she goes on to say, if we could have this last tweet on our screens, that it is not uncommon that those companies terminate patients' contracts in the midst of serious medical illnesses, such as when they're in ICUs or comas, something truly regrettable and shameful. We've come to the end of the show. I would like to thank our viewers for tuning in, for sharing these very important topics that we discuss every last Wednesday of the month: Uganda-Rwanda relations, the health insurance schemes and issues, and how to, find solution-oriented viewpoints. And last but not least, smart systems, meters on public transport. So let's keep the conversations going. We're always here to listen to our viewers and talk about issues, burning issues that they put forward, and look at how we can discuss them with a view to solving these issues. Thank you to our partners, Uzi Collections and Bourbon Coffee. Thank you to our viewers for tuning in. Have a good night. See you again next week.